It is time for the Cyber Executive Podcast, where each week we talk with top industry experts about risk, technology, and leadership. I am your host, Marc Ashworth, and today I have the pleasure of having my friend Chris Trifiletti, who is the cybersecurity manager at Ameren, with me here today. Chris, thank you very much for being here as a guest on the latest episode of the Cyber Executive Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris. So, we've met through the InfraGard, St. Louis InfraGard Alliance and stuff a few years back, and I think at the time you were still with the FBI at that point. But since then, you retired, you moved on to Ameren, and so did you specialize in securing critical infrastructure, or can you tell us a little bit about your history there? I know we've talked some, and it's been very fascinating, and I think it's a great story to tell.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mark. And by the time you and I met, I was very much specializing in critical infrastructure. But one of the appeals of the FBI is all the different career paths you might have. And I was there a long time. I was there 20 years. So I started, back in 1999. And had a little bit of skills on the internet, and that's all it took to be an internet crimes investigator. And we were just getting started a few years into what is still a problem with internet crimes against children. So that was my early specialty with the FBI. Got involved in doing a lot of the cases and a lot of the training of others, teaching them how to make cases online for crimes against children, including child pornography and things like that. So that was the start, and then the path kind of wound through FBI Baltimore, where I was at, FBI headquarters. I did take a transfer, tried out the supervisor thing, and ironically, the desk I wound up at was InfraGard. It was the InfraGard program. Mm-hmm. So I touched on it briefly there. But in 2005, and then transferred back near home here to FBI Springfield. And it wasn't until a few years later, about 2008 or 9, that I touched the InfraGard program again. So by the time you and I met, I had been specializing in critical infrastructure protection through that program for probably about 10 years until I met you in about 2018. So lots to do, lots of different cases.
Yeah, definitely. And, critical infrastructure, it's got, its own challenges, between the physical side and the security side. So can you talk about some of those challenges in securing critical infrastructure?
Yeah, the biggest difference for critical infrastructure and the way an entity might defend really comes down to whether it's municipal owned or investor owned. And, a lot of the issues you've been seeing in the last few years with difficulties in defending infrastructure comes from those municipal or small government owned or cooperative owned entities that might not have the level of resources of an investor-owned utility to defend both at the physical level and the cybersecurity level. It doesn't mean it's easy at the investor-owned level. Obviously, there's a lot to do, but those are the biggest differences, really. And then just the scope and scale of a critical infrastructure. No doubt, financial services sector, you have the main office, you have data centers, you have a lot of branch offices, but the number of facilities, both office buildings, but also the infrastructure itself out there in the field across our region and any critical infrastructure's footprint can be quite large and daunting, and to defend from both a physical and a cyber sense.
Yeah, and I would think the challenges towards electrical and gas would be even more so because of, the vast amount of area that covers, and, you have your substations and the pipeline going through and maybe different valves and all that sort of stuff, or tanks and all that. So what's some of the particular challenges around securing that compared to maybe other parts of critical infrastructure?
Yeah, with both electric and gas, it's important to understand that it's not just one thing for either one of them. electric, starts at what we call the bulk electric system, the high voltage transmission lines that come off of generation facilities, whether that be traditional coal or other fossil fuels, nuclear, wind, hydro. At the bulk level, you're talking about a much different type of component and cybersecurity as opposed to something smaller like we have in our neighborhoods. Once it gets down to the transmission distribution level where it comes into our homes as usable power, it's just a full gamut of different types of protections that have to be done at all of those levels. Gas is very similar, where it's produced and stored and then transmitted through pipelines and then into the distribution system where, again, it's brought down to pressures that can be used in our businesses and homes. Each of those are different types of facilities and entities, and they account for that large footprint I was talking about before, the need for a great number of facilities out there and a lot of different technologies, both physical and cyber, to make those deliveries to our homes and businesses.
And with that, I would think the regulations and legal requirements, I know in finance it's constantly changing, it seems like. Is that the case in critical infrastructure? Is there more regulatory and legal requirements for securing that, or is it more SEC related at the organizational level because of, publicly traded company, or maybe it's all three?
It is all three. And on your cyber executive podcast, maybe I'm your first non-executive, so I have the luxury of not worrying about that quite as much as some of my bosses may. I really am focused squarely on the threat, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit too, the threat and the threat actors. But it is all three. On the electric side, again, I speak electric and gas differently. We have regulations from FERC handed down to NERC, and these are most specifically the CIP, the Critical Infrastructure Protection guidelines and requirements that we have to follow. And then as a publicly traded company, as you pointed out, yes, we're bound by all of that typical regulation, rules, and filings that should be made for that. Gas is a little different. It's covered by the same corporate protections, but the entity that oversees pipeline gas, for instance, because it's a transportation system, is actually the TSA, DHS-TSA, the Transportation Security Administration. So plenty of oversight, and for good reason. I think one of the first things movies go to, right, is take down the grid or blow up the pipeline. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, and so the regulations are there for a reason, as well as further requirements that we put on ourselves to make sure it's done safely.
Yeah, the movies definitely like that as a big topic, don't they? To for the adventure and to take out the power grid or the transformers or something along that line. So, is speaking of it at the real life component of that versus the movies, are there different challenges, or are there the challenges for physical security greater than that for cyber, or it's just different, but it because of the way it is? But I would think it'd be definitely maybe more challenged because of geographically, but maybe not.
Yeah, I figure most of your audience are in the cybersecurity field like we are. I'll start with cyber. And it's no different than probably all of the other businesses that are listening in today. Most of the cybersecurity challenge is basic. I don't want to say boring, but the traumatic stuff. Phishing emails, account takeovers, financial attempts, ransomware attacks, BEC, business email compromise. It's not usually about some sort of attack trying to take down the grid, because quite frankly, that's difficult to do. And I don't want to tempt fate here, but it's a great movie theme. But has it happened? No, it has not happened. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of protections in place, and it's difficult. So most of the cybersecurity attacks we deal with are the same as you would find at almost any other business. The grid is just some other part of what we do. And it's the same thing for the physical side. Physical attacks on grid components, electric, gas, tend to fall into about 4 areas. Just plain old theft, right? Some of that stuff out there is valuable. Metals, copper, other things that are out there in the field. There's a lot of attempts at theft. Sabotage, just trying to break something at a simple level, not trying to take down the whole grid, but damaging one individual facility. Vandalism, if it's not really motivated with any intent to take down anything, if it's just to be harmful, that happens. Ballistic damage, you have seen that in the news where people are shooting at electric and gas components, trying to take them down or cause harm. Obviously, that's taken much more seriously. Cyber-wise, again, getting back to that, most of the attacks are going to be low-level and opportunistic. Even the ones that where we see small impacts on electric and gas over the last 5 to 10 years are usually opportunistic. They were trying to attack the IT side, the information technology side, and happened to find themselves in a position to damage something on the OT side, the operational technology side, which has the ICS, industrial control systems, or SCADA components on them. There are some actors that are trying to attack those from a cyber sense, and obviously harming those things from a physical sense. Operational technology would be a goal of threat actors too. But the upside is electric, gas, most other infrastructures are hardened against weather and environmental issues. So it actually makes them harder to attack from a cyber or physical sense too, because they're made to be safe from natural disasters as well.
Yeah, my dad, he was a troubleman for Ameren and retired from there many years ago. And I remember him telling stories of people shooting transformers and those sort of things. I think the biggest thing he had to worry about was wrecks and collisions into the poles, or for him storms. That was when he was always most out there and stuff. But when back in 2021, May of 21, so almost 4 years ago now, the Colonial Pipeline got taken out from ransomware, and so since that time, do you think other than the business side of things maybe, but do you think that the electrical grids and pipelines, those cyber attacks, has decreased since then, or do you think it kind of remains the same? Because that became a big political thing for those that did that, and so you had pretty much the Russian government and the U.S. government coming down hard on those attackers. So do you think they learned their lessons, or has that been short-term memory and they've continued on just as they're doing for everyone else?
Yeah, that's a good setup, and I would disagree with only one small piece of that the Russian government had come down hard on those actors. It was the case then, and it really continues to be, that actors that are in Russia or Russian-speaking or any way loyal to Russia can act with impunity against Western targets, whether that be Europe or Western Hemisphere here, United States, North America. The rest of that, all absolutely true. There was an initial response, a strong one by the U.S. government to investigate that. You saw an increasing use of the sanctions list against any group that was found to be doing those types of attacks. And the idea was that they couldn't be paid. You would stop any ransom from being paid to the ransom actors. As time went on, and especially because the Russia invasion of Ukraine took place and really changed the geopolitical landscape at that time, that turned out to be a short-term benefit. The groups rebranded, they broke into splinter groups, they created different models, so even if they were on sanctions lists, they would operate under a different moniker, still endeavor to be paid. There have been some successful takedowns since then, no doubt, by my former employer, the FBI, and others. But clearly, as you'd expect, and from being in the business, more groups have splintered off and continue to do ransomware attacks. So I would say on the whole, there are a greater number of ransomware actors and a greater number of attacks. There was a small lull, I believe, in the second half of 2023 based on sheer numbers, but I think 2024 and 2025 have seen us go right back on. And not all of these ransomware actors, as you know, are even bothering to encrypt the data anymore. A lot of them have gone to a data extortion model where it don't even need to lock up the data. We've done a better job backing things up, right? We can recover the data now, so that doesn't hurt us the way it used to. So now you have to take that data, put it out on a leak site, somehow embarrass us about it, give it to competitors or customers. And that's another reason I think where you see a lot of copycats now on that technique, because now you're just talking about data leakage and using a Tor or an Onion site to put that data out there and do extortion with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think extortion's becoming the new way of doing it, especially as you saw the groups getting more and more success. They were doing that double extortion between the, locking things down and doing that component, and then also then saying, okay, well, here's your key, but I still got your data now. You got to pay me for the data side. And I think that's become more lucrative on that versus the ransomware side. And but it's still a good entry point for them to get into the environment in the first place. And then if they can move laterally, then of course, they're going to still try to take out as much as they can. But I do think the actors are getting a little bit more specific and really going for that extortion component more so as well. So I know in the finance side, there are certain threat actors we look for more so, or we profile and everything. Are there any on the critical infrastructure that you target or kind of watch more so for their MOs and how they're working the industry and stuff?
It's really difficult because so far, so good, especially again with bulk electric and large electric entities. I think they found deeper pockets, unfortunately, in education, healthcare, some other sectors that they've been able to hit. And we haven't seen a lot of intentional attacks in energy yet from the ransomware actors. Now, again, I'm not tempting fate. I don't want that to happen, but
not at all.
I think they found other targets, so far. We do watch with interest rising stars, so to speak, groups that look like they're becoming more active. And of course, like any defensive team with multiple components, we got a lot of great people working on a lot of good things. We take a look at every new technique, tactic, procedure from the rising stars and, make sure we're covered to the extent possible. Whatever they're doing to get in, move laterally once they're in, do their extortion or leakage, we want to make sure we're a step ahead of that.
Yeah, I agree. Staying up with the threat intel that's out there, from the FBI or the ISACs and some of the other partners out there is really critical to keep up with those indicators and making sure you're watching for those and just keeping your eye open. I do agree too that I think a lot of the attacks are happening in some of the other industries such as education, which are probably easier targets in a lot of ways. And then also healthcare, which just because of the type of data, it's it's a lot more valuable. And so they're able to, ask for more from the extortion like we were talking about.
Well, and, them in particular, you're seeing a triple extortion model now, right? Where some of the company's executives or coworkers or even customers are contacted and told that data has been taken, and they try to, incite panic, put pressure on the company to pay the ransom by scaring the coworkers or the customers with the data that's been taken. So, it does fit well, unfortunately, with those very sensitive sectors. And, we were probably crazy to think we could pay off ransomware actors and that they would be somehow magnanimous and upstanding individuals and not, use that data against us. And again, we've seen, right, you followed them like I have, several examples where they've either done a secondary attack or there's fighting amongst the actors themselves, and the data may or may not get deleted, might be used again later. So, best offense is a good defense in this case. It's usually said the other way around, but you really just don't want to deal with a situation where you have to pay off a ransomware actor or a data extortion actor.
Right, I agree. So, from an industry perspective, what do you feel is the overall state of the security of the electrical grids and gas pipelines for both the physical and cyber side? Obviously, I don't want you to talk about Ameren, your parent company, but just from an overall industry, how do you feel?
You touched on it briefly there. Yeah. You touched on the ISACs, and I know financial services ISAC is a very good one that you participate in, FS ISAC. EISAC, Energy ISAC, very good. Just celebrated their 25th anniversary, one of the longest running ISACs as well. And we have the added advantage of supporting the North American grid together. And that's not just the United States, but that's Canada and portions of Baja, Mexico as well. So it's truly a collaborative effort to defend the grid. Because of that, there's a lot of sharing that goes on with publicly traded companies, like you pointed out. So some of the sharing is done anonymously, like it would be in the FS ISAC or other ISACs. But we're also very good at sharing emerging threat information in real time. And I think the customers, the North America in general, would want that from us, right? They want us to be defending the grid together. Competition comes second, cooperation on keeping that running, because maybe the biggest stress isn't the threat actors, but you can look at NERC's annual report on grid reliability and resilience. And you've seen it in the news, with the greater need for energy for data centers, for electrification of vehicles and other needs, there's more energy demands on the grid than ever. And you combine that with opportunistic threat actors, and you have a potential problem going forward. The threat actors have already figured out they would like to cause a cyber problem at the same time as a physical problem. I'm not letting any secrets out. They write about this prolifically. They put it out there. They try to teach each other how to do it. So we have to make sure that it's not easy for them to compromise from a cyber point of view a grid that's already destabilized physically. We don't want to make it easy on them. So smart growth, smart reliability and resilience of the grid will be a key going forward.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but around the business side of things and training, and so in many industries the challenge is the people is the front line to everything that's happening from a cyber perspective and the awareness and everything. How do you see security training awareness implemented for all personnel there? Is it pretty much the same thing we're doing on the finance and other businesses, with your phishing training and, maybe annual training, those sort of things? Is it something very similar that you see in the industry?
Yeah, again, you'd asked me not to go into specifics, so I won't describe the modules or the programs, but they've done such a good job. And I say they, but it used to be me. That was the first job I came over for when I left the FBI. I was on our awareness and engagement team, a program we call CyberSafe. And it's really, I was surprised. So I think others might be surprised that, an energy company, why would they need industry-leading awareness and engagement? And in fact, it is, and they've won some awards since I left. I didn't win the awards; they did it after I left. But the training they've designed, the partners they've engaged with, the innovations they've done, the frequency, and the results that they've produced have won some industry awards. And I'm proud of them for doing that because, we're just an energy company, but we have all of the risks. We engage in a high level of financial transactions. We have website and an app like any other business would. We have lots of apps. We have the ability for the customers to engage us in many different ways through the apps, through phone systems, through our customer care centers, which, as you know, Toad, telephone-oriented attack delivery, Toad, using phones to do social engineering attacks is also on the rise. And so we have all of those risks, and both can be used against us, or our brand, our name can be used to conduct attacks against others. So we want to make sure to support both sides of that. And I would say our awareness and engagement internally and externally is very high.
Great. So where do you think the industry as a whole is going as far as security is concerned?
I like that there's an emphasis on tracking the threat actors. That's the transition I made a few years ago. It's obviously something I'm very comfortable with from the FBI's point of view. I've listened into a couple of your other discussions with your fellow CISOs, and I understand the challenge you have picking the right tools for the right needs. And that's something that my team is able to do for our decision makers by tracking the threat actors at a more granular level and reporting on their techniques, tactics, procedures, what devices or vulnerabilities they might be attacking. We can help them make smart decisions on how to implement and change architecture and other things that makes us more defensible. And I think that's probably emblematic. It's easy to see it from your own point of view, but I see that most organizations now and most conferences that folks go to, has at least some portion, if not a significant portion, on understanding the threat actors. We're all opened up to a globe of financial opportunists that want to rob Western pockets in particular. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's a lot of ongoing geopolitical issues that also have those adversaries have an interest in harming either one of us, right? Hurting our economy through the banking system, hurting energy reliability, and basically affecting everybody. You and I, and perhaps just information security in general, though, we're like the nanosecond infrastructures, right? If we fail, everybody else fails. And Russia in particular, what did they go after in Ukraine? They went after energy, and they went after, at least with fake text messages, and in some cases real attacks, banking and finance. They wanted people to think their money was unsafe. And it's unfortunately a really good way to cause panic in a society, right? Make me think I don't have financial stability. Water, food, transportation, all very, very important as well. But they take hours to days to fail, right? But you take that ATM network down or make people think it's down, they panic immediately. And it'll be the same thing with the grid. I'm knocking on wood if I can find some. I don't think it'll be an attack on the grid that'll be the first issue we have. It'll be the perception of an attack. Mm-hmm. They'll figure out some way to convince our citizenry that something is wrong with some portion of the grid, and the panic will be enough. The former director of CISA, Jenna Easterly, would describe this in greater detail than I am now to Congress and others. We have to be resilient. The systems themselves have to be resilient, but the people have to be resilient. You can't let fear, uncertainty, doubt, in our industry, FUD, right? We call it FUD. You can't let that cause you to believe there's a problem greater than the actual problem.
Yeah, and we've seen over the years, Russia is really good at deception and putting things out, and they're really utilizing social media. That's like the biggest gift you could ever do for them is social media, and to be able to put false messages out, and they've really taken that to heart, and has done a lot of things over the past 5 to 10 years along that line, whether it was election around or, some other motive off of there. They do that probably better than anybody else, I think. So.
Yeah, it's our open society. We all want it. We all love it. But it does make us easier to attack through information and disinformation. And not just Russia. Russia's been great at it since before cyber, right? The Cold War, yep. Classic spy versus spy. They're very good at misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. But we all watched with great interest and now great concern at how good China got at this. They only really started dabbling in it, at least on the unclassified side. The first reporting we were seeing of them being involved in widespread misinformation, and really only in their own hemisphere at first, was about 3 years ago. But about 2 years ago, they started dabbling in the Western Hemisphere. And in the last year in particular, they'd gotten really good at it. And just like everything else they do in cyber, with the scale and scope of what they're able to do, it doesn't bode well for our future. Their ability to put out massive amounts of messaging or just amplify existing messaging and spread discord amongst our own citizenry. It's another one of those things I hope people will be resilient through, right? Don't overreact to what you see or hear until you verify it. Don't make the perception of the problem worse than the actual problem at hand.
Yeah, well, Chris, the internet would never lie to us, and social media would never lie to us, right? So,
no, but it seems to be getting increasingly more difficult to find verifiable sources, right? I know we've all become more polarized, and non-traditional media is more prevalent than ever. I'm not saying there's not trustworthy sources out there, but I think everybody has a different definition of what that is, and we can't let that tear us apart.
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of change directions a little bit, and I've been doing this, I think, for all the guests, or a couple questions here. So what is something that that companies could do better in the security industry?
Well, I mentioned our EISAC is very good. For the energy companies and our own sharing, I think cross-sector sharing is still not where it needs to be. And you and I both participate in the InfraGard program, infrastructure protection. We talked about it at the beginning. Mm-hmm. InfraGard has a role there, but I think it's eventually going to need to be more than that. Because again, the ransomware actors generally are opportunistic. They're going to hit me or you, or the healthcare or education. We need to find a way that we can be more quickly defenders for each other. So much information is held proprietary, and either you can pay for it or you can't, or you have the relationship or you don't. And I know in some cases that's because the information is closer hold. It can't be released publicly. But I think there's an ongoing challenge to share information more rapidly and to defeat those rising stars and emerging attacks.
Yeah, good points. So what is something that you're tired of hearing about in the industry?
So many of your guests I saw, go right to AI, and I'll actually mention that as something, we have some hope for, some promise with. I think they do too. But I mentioned it earlier, just every movie, book, show, story, taking the grid down. We're going to take the grid down, and again, not tempting fate. I think I've said that 3 times. I don't want it to happen. But there's a lot of protections in place to make sure it doesn't, and I don't want people to have the perception that has happened so much, because they think they saw it in a real story. There's been some events of brownouts, limited blackouts from physical causes, but you haven't seen an adversary take down significant portions of the electric grid, gas pipelines. There's a lot of protections in place, and we like to tell folks too, since our equipment is out in the field, see something, say something. We need help. We need people to report things to the authorities when they see it. We need them to report the cyber scams when it comes out, to our customers. Don't assume we've seen it before. Please report these things in. and then I won't be tired about hearing about taking down the grid anymore. They can keep it in the movies all they want. I just don't want it to happen for real.
I agree, definitely. And so finally, what is a particular trend in technology or in security that we may want to consider?
Yeah, I'm going to leave the technology to you and your fellow CISOs because you guys make great decisions there. You know, I follow the threat actors, and I think it's not just energy when I talk about these things. And I want all of your listeners to know we've been actively tracking, and I think you should too. A lot of the hard work has been done here on this, on the DPRK, the North Korean imposter worker problem. That's a lot bigger and more widespread, I think, than most of our contemporaries know. And they need to be very careful about hiring remote workers if they do that within their own organization. We don't. But your contractors, your vendors, any third parties you work with, are they properly verifying their identities of their new hires? Because the imposter worker problem continues to grow. There's an indictment in the news just overnight. A guy was running an operation out of Maryland for 3 years. There's some confusion about whether that was also North Korean workers or Chinese, because in the indictment it's referred to as a Chinese server farm that he was helping to run to give these people U.S. IP addresses so they can then do their work looking like they were from in the U.S. But in any case, whether China's figured that out yet or not, there's no reason they couldn't copy that technique because DPRK has gotten very good at it. So I would say that's something to watch. Turning to China, we certainly have a lot of attention on Volt Typhoon as named by Microsoft. All these threat actors, as you know, are known by different names depending on who the vendor is, or the government will sometimes give them different names. But Volt Typhoon in particular, attacking lots of different types of edge devices, trying to establish a foothold in telecommunications, energy if they could. So we've got our eye on them. Salt Typhoon, so named, going after telecommunications at the end of 2024. You saw where they were very successful against a great number of U.S. telecommunications providers. Yeah. In the same way everybody depends on energy, we all depend on communications. There's a lot of critical interdependencies in infrastructure, right? We need each other to function, or else we all fail together. So the attackers know that. China's figured out edge devices and attacking things like that. North Korea is making money off of imposter workers. Iran seems to blow with the political winds, and I think we'll see an uptick because of current relations with them. We'll see an uptick in Western attacks. The cyber Avengers, which they name themselves, some of these threat actors name themselves for emotional impact, right? They're trying to increase that panic. They did some attacks on North American water in the last couple of years. We could see that happen again. I want to point out that I don't believe anybody's drinking water has actually been affected by those. Nobody's been harmed by those. So again, we don't want to make the problem worse than the real problem, but they're coming after a water supply, and that is bad. That's the problem. Right. So that's something to watch. And then, of course, Russia's still involved with Ukraine. We probably don't have enough time left to talk about all the nuances there, but everything from, like you mentioned earlier, information, misinformation, influences, to actual attacks on electric components, although only successful at a small scale, even in Ukraine, to physical attacks on electric components, including nuclear during that war. There was a lot going on that could be instructive about an encounter with Russia or another large adversary such as China, if there were a skirmish over Taiwan or other U.S.-China relations. Those are all things we should watch for every one of our infrastructures, banking and finance included. But I think it would most certainly include energy, water, transportation, the same things you see, when you go to war in a country. What do you try to take out first? Well, that's what the adversaries will try to take out through a cyber means first as well, and we want to be ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, we're out of time. thank you for this wonderful conversation. Definitely very interesting, and I really appreciate you coming on board to talk to the audience and tell us about critical infrastructure and things that you're watching and lots of things to consider for everyone, especially around the threat intelligence side of things. So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mark. Appreciate it.
And for everyone else, tune in next week, and then also be sure to like and subscribe and share the podcast. So until then, thank you for listening to the Cyber Executive Podcast.